Once upon a time, there was a starry-eyed adult who had a humble YouTube channel of just over 1,600 subscribers. On October 31st, 2021, he uploaded a video breaking down the short trailer for Grand Theft Auto: The Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, and discussed all the red flags he saw with the trailer and everything surrounding it. The lack of gameplay in the trailer, which indicated that if they're not showing you something, it's probably for a good reason. The fact the trailer came out something like less than a month before the game was set to be released, which indicated a rushed production. The lack of physical release until weeks after the digital release, which indicated yet more of a rushed production akin to the put it out, patch it in later attitude of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. The fact that they were pulling the original versions from sale, which indicated a lack of faith in their new games standing up on their own, and of course the fact that the game looked like ass. With a mishmash graphic style of AI upscaled character models and realistic lighting and fire mixed together with the still crude animations which fit with the original art style but stuck out like a sore thumb with the quote-unquote upgraded graphics. That man was me. This video got a lot of backlash at the time, and as far as percentages, is still to this day one of my most disliked videos. It could have been worse though. I held back some of my more harsh criticisms and sugarcoated the video with some faint praise because I knew the video was gonna get backlash. I don't remember exactly what I was going to say, but I do remember holding back because this wasn't that long after the Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart fiasco, and I wasn't in the mood for another wave of larger content creators sending their fans to harass me under the guise of free exposure, and then turn around and play victim when their own fans felt they were going too far. Yes, that actually happened. Incidentally,
the apology must be as loud and as public as the disrespect.
But then the game came out, and you want to know who got the last laugh? Nobody, because everyone was just kinda sad, myself included. As a matter of fact, I think the GTA Trilogy, the Defective Edition as it was deemed, is one of the most rare and magical things that gaming can provide these days. It was a game where everyone universally agreed it was a pile of crap. In this day and age, where small and inconsequential things can make people cry foul, having a game where there's absolutely no division of opinion is kind of crazy if you think about it. For a brief moment, we were all united. Still, it was a travesty at launch, and within days, had hour-long glitch compilations. I didn't play it at the time though. Aside from being broke and not really having any interest in buying a game I knew I wouldn't like, especially at full price, I also didn't feel I really needed to do any sort of follow-up, because what was there to follow up on? I was right, haha. There's no mileage in that. But it's been a few years now, and since the game has ostensibly been fixed, I thought it might be a good time to see how the game, or games, have fared now in the grandness of time. Let's go through each game and give a general rundown of the experience in the remaster, starting with... To give a brief rundown of my opinion on GTA 3, it's easily the weakest of the entire trilogy on account of the fact that it's so primitive in so many ways. As such, it didn't have the same refinement or variety that later games had. It was more or less just a standard string of missions leading to a major overarching goal of getting revenge on your psycho ex-girlfriend. A story for the ages, that one. There's no gimmicks, no major concepts they explore outside of the linear missions, very little vehicle variety. It's very primitive. But with that said, it still offers an extremely streamlined and pure experience compared to a lot of overcomplicated open world games that came later. It's a straightforward string of missions that doesn't waste your time and gets in and out before it gets old, given that even for first time players it's maybe 6 to 8 hours long. So it's one of those cases of a game that aside from its concept doesn't really do a lot groundbreaking, but it's a nice snacky experience when you're sick of the more overcomplicated modern games. As for the remaster, what does it really do to separate the experience? Well, first of all, we really need to discuss the elephant in the room: the graphics. This applies for all three games. To be clear, I'm fully aware that the graphics may have looked worse at launch, but it's really not that much better now. Because polishing a turd still makes it a turd. Originally, the art style worked more or less, because while it was just an early 2000s attempt at looking realistic, the crude character models combined with the crude animations along with the primitive looking environments all meshed together to make something that, if nothing else, looked cohesive. Because it was all going for the same thing, it works as a game of its time, and much like PS1 games, the crudeness almost gives it an art style in itself, if unintentionally. But by upgrading the graphics in massive air quotes, this game is left with the graphical equivalent of puke on the sidewalk. You have extremely waxy looking character models that each look like they have Lego clip-on hairdos. These character models range from off-putting to outright creepy, and they don't even have the good sense to upgrade all the textures in the game. While character models are high definition, the textures on background details don't look improved upon at all. Meaning that in some scenes, you'll end up with clay doll looking people talking to each other while sitting on a chair that has 2002 era fabric textures, and they don't even cleanly transition very well. You can clearly see where the textures break. So this was a rush job in the sense that you only know certain things were properly upscaled even to this day, and even the things that were properly upscaled look completely trash. And then you mix that with the crude and primitive animations, and it just looks like they threw a bunch of assets in a blender, and the result is a mess, and not even a consistent mess. Just a completely tragic mess of terrible looking BS. They can do as many patches as they want, but that will never change the fact that this game looks butt ugly. Not until they decide to do an actual overhaul to the game and either restore the original visuals or give it an actual proper upgrade with modern or at least properly stylized graphics. But they're not going to do that because this was a hack job that was rushed out the door. It makes the entire experience feel so uncanny, as if this was a game made by a company with absolutely no artistic direction, so every aspect clashes with every other aspect. I know if you're watching this video, you probably already know this, so I'm preaching to the choir, but that in no way means that this isn't worth reiterating for the millionth time. Otherwise than that, as far as GTA 3, the way I would describe it would be frustratingly functional. After years worth of patches and fixes, GTA 3 is finally stable enough that I got through the whole thing without it crashing on me once. So if you're a forgiving person who just views it entirely through the lens of can I get from start to finish without any sort of catastrophic interruptions, then this version of the game is playable so long as you can stomach the aesthetic or lack thereof. With that said, however, even despite being generally functional, I still had some issues. Most notably would be micro stutter. Let me be clear, I have a pretty decent rig. Sure, my RTX 3070 is a few years old now, but it can crush way more demanding games than this without even breaking a sweat, and yet this game is working on such an unstable foundation that every now and again the game just stutters. It's not often, but it's often enough that it gets really annoying and briefly takes me out of the experience. And let me be clear, this is an issue with all three games. They may be easier to ignore if you don't have the eye for it, and it may be only an issue for me and not necessarily an issue with anyone else, but it still annoyed me. Otherwise, going through the game, there were a lot of small issues I found. There's a lot of little quirks. There were grass textures that were supposed to be on a hill but were actually elevating 3 feet above it. There were cars that when they fell into the water, they were still running and were still honking at me, so that tells me that NPCs don't necessarily die anymore when they go in the water. There was even a point where a car was driving over a ghost bridge. None of these things have ever been a problem in any of my previous playthroughs of GTA 3. And maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of them than they really deserve because I'm already philosophically against these versions of the game to begin with, and so every issue is accentuated for me. But then again, I never claimed that this was an objective critique. Granted, there are a few things that I can appreciate with this version of the game. First of all, finally giving GTA 3 an actual map. This was something that was only introduced with Vice City, and I appreciate them no longer requiring me to have to intuit the entire map on my own. Plus, there's also the fact that they give you the quickest route to your destination on the mini-map, just like most modern games, though that's probably only useful if you're playing this for the first time. I've played this so many times that I end up not even taking the routes because I know a quicker, if less legal route. Then, despite looking ugly, there's one aspect of the graphics I actually quite like. You see, there's this area beyond Shoreside Vale that's completely inaccessible, but it exists mostly just to give the illusion that the game world doesn't just end like a lot of open world games. Note, this was only really possible because air travel is really difficult in this game. Now, with that said, this area to my recollection was always just a green blob of land, probably 6 polygons across. But now during the night, this area lights up, which gives the illusion that there are actually things out there. It's a nice touch that makes the world feel a lot less finite. Then there are the updated controls. I couldn't turn that shit off fast enough. It already messes with my head enough that the game doesn't support a PS4 controller, meaning I have to constantly translate the controls in my head because I'm not used to this Xbox controller layout. Couple that with a control system that feels more natural to a modern game and not a retro, more arcadey game, and that's a double whammy of thanks but no thanks. But hey, at least they give you the option, and they also give you the option to revert the controls. That's the thing though, for every aspect they introduce in the remaster, they give you the option to do things the way they used to be. Such as the weapon switching, which can be done with a weapon wheel, but I almost never used it because I'm so used to the old way of doing things of just scrolling through the weapons, and you don't have that many weapons, so it's not a big deal. It's not inconvenient. Unlike the radio station switching, which used to be done by pressing L1, but now it's done with the D-pad like in every other game that has a radio and is sane. That's nice, but it's such a small touch that it barely even matters. Matter of fact, I feel like a lot of these changes are so inconsequential in the grand scheme of things that when taken on balance, I feel like they really weren't big enough or necessary enough improvements to make the rather large drawbacks worth it. The one thing I can give this version credit for over the original that doesn't also account for the other games in this collection is that the cars are more durable. Where they were quite brittle in the original version of GTA 3, which I count as the worst part of the original version of the game. So yeah, that's nice, but even that isn't enough to make this version worth it over the original version when you have all the drawbacks. Ultimately, I find GTA 3 is playable, but not ideal. And I feel like that might be a statement for this entire trilogy of remasters. Now, when it comes to the general consensus, most people of a certain age will either say that Vice City or San Andreas is the best. Personally, I'm more on the boat of San Andreas, but that doesn't diminish the quality of Vice City whatsoever. While GTA 3 broke the mold, Vice City was the one that introduced a lot of changes and additions that are still implemented to this day, and its unique approach to story progression was really fun. How there were some mission paths that opened up by themselves, but several that you had to buy property for, and you had to gradually buy enough property and gain enough assets until you activate the final mission string. It's a really fun game with a fantastically unique progression and tons of character and personality, which was something that was absent in GTA 3. Definitely a fantastic game, but not one that I can endlessly replay like San Andreas. Now, Vice City is probably the most untouched of all the remasters because at least in this specific update, I didn't find any catastrophic issues with the game. Matter of fact, I would say that this is about as close to the original as you can get without playing the original version. However, the game is still completely ass ugly. A lot of the color seems to have been drained on top of that, but in compensating for that, along with GTA 3, they also removed these annoying loading screens that take place whenever you go from one island to the other, which is about as annoying as it gets when you're playing this on old school hardware. But then again, I'd imagine these loading screens were either removed or were able to be removed from the original PC version, so I guess that's kind of a moot point. This version of Vice City has all the same theoretical improvements that GTA 3 does, but also it really doesn't have any specific improvements in itself. Matter of fact, there are even a few notable things that have been removed. There's a good chunk of the soundtrack that isn't here because they were way too cheap to renew the licensing, but it's not as bad as it will get. However, having Vice City without Michael Jackson or Ozzy Osbourne makes it feel a bit naked. And I take exception to this given that Rockstar Games is the most profitable game developer in the world, probably by a wide margin, and I understand that it wasn't Rockstar Games that made this remaster, it was Grove Street Games, but same difference, let's be honest. I mean, how many subsidiaries does Rockstar Games have? Like 12? The fact that this company isn't officially called Rockstar Florida or Rockstar Gainesville is basically irrelevant. Although in fairness, there appeared to have been some sort of drama behind the scenes that has resulted in a distancing between Rockstar Games and Grove Street Games. At least that's what appears to have happened. Especially because, from what I understand, a lot of the fixes to the trilogy since launch were actually the result of a company called Video Games Deluxe. At some point, duties were handed over from Grove Street Games to them. And it's because of this that Video Games Deluxe has actually been recently bought out and turned into Rockstar Australia. But either way, given how many subsidiaries of Rockstar Games there are, what it means to be Rockstar Games at this point is kind of irrelevant. The brand's been diluted to the point that it doesn't really matter that they weren't called Rockstar Games at the time. But either way, subsidiary or not, the effect is still the same. They still have to go through either the main Rockstar Games studio or through Take-Two Interactive to get funding, but even regardless of that, Rockstar Games and Take-Two Interactive as a whole should be happy to shell out a bit of extra cash to keep authenticity, given that this is their legacy. But then again, that's what happens when you're on top of the world. You earn the right to not have to care. People are gonna buy this game anyway, and even if not, it's barely a blip on their radar. Still, there's nothing that sticks out to me in my memory regarding any issues that Vice City has, so if you can get past the ugly as hell graphics, then this is a perfectly acceptable way to play Vice City at this point. Okay, I'm just gonna take an aside here for a second to let you guys know what happened. I had just recorded the entire rest of this script, right? And I look over at my recording software and see that my microphone disconnected not 20 minutes ago. Recording audio sucks the first time, and now I have to do it again. Fucking hell. Meanwhile, I would say even to this day, GTA San Andreas is the worst remaster of the three. GTA San Andreas is probably one of my favorite games of all time. Having played it for the first time when I was 12, it blew my mind and basically ruined all of gaming for me. Because its hitherto undreamt of freedom and variety set a new standard for me of what games could be. And on top of that, it had an incredible story and mission variety that made it an absolute treat to go through. Even if it did endeavor to ruin itself for me by constantly glitching out and soft locking me before the end of the game. To the point where, like a man on severe blood thinners, I didn't end up beating it until my 4th attempt. Of course, the sheer size for its time meant that it was quite thinly spread, and they had to cut corners in a lot of ways. Such as having a very small variety of NPCs and also having a few aspects to the game that felt a bit disjointed and rushed, like how we had to kill Ryder apropos of nothing in the San Fierro chapter. But despite any issues, it's still great, and that's why it's such a travesty that this is easily the game to make it out the worst out of all of them as far as this remaster is concerned. Because it just seems like this remaster caused so many issues that are seemingly unfixable, which I guess makes sense. GTA 3 is about as simple as it gets, so there's not much to screw up, and even if you do screw that up, there's not much to fix. Meanwhile, Vice City is more complicated, but it's still significantly streamlined compared to what is pound for pound the absolute behemoth of GTA San Andreas. There is one, and I do mean one advantage that this version of the game has over its original version. And that is checkpoints. Granted, the other two games in this remaster also had checkpoints, but those games had missions that were generally so short they really didn't come up that much, and even some missions that probably should have had checkpoints didn't have checkpoints. But either way, San Andreas' missions are longer and more elaborate, which means they necessitated more checkpoints if they were going to implement them, and they did, which I do appreciate because some of these missions can be quite unforgiving even after your 10th playthrough. And since reloading gives you your weapons back if you died, that means that it's much easier to retain your weapons, other than like predetermined moments where they take away your weapons. But that in itself is nowhere near enough to justify everything else in this version of the game. The first thing that really irks me is that there's like 10 songs removed from the soundtrack. No Tom Petty, no Rage Against the Machine, no Ozzy Osbourne, no Tupac, no NWA, no Joe Cocker. I could go on. The soundtrack is part of this game's identity, part of its atmosphere, so removing it is akin to removing the game's soul.
Where's the love?
Otherwise than that, the game has all the same issues that the other two games had, and it also has some of the ugliest, most potato-looking character models you will ever see. Then, within a few minutes, the AI was catastrophically bugging out, and that was only in the first couple minutes. The thing that really stands out for me in this game are the physics objects. From what I understand, the original release of the game had catastrophically buggy physics objects, and they would just flip and roll around all over the place. So their solution was, instead of fixing the physics objects, was to make them clip through the ground, and even then there were moments where the physics objects would still flip out. And then we have the individual glitches and fuck-ups. You had such moments as cops literally popping into existence, a helicopter exploding and then spitting out another helicopter, gangsters T-posing during the Pier 69 mission, or I guess that's more of a Y-pose. A train spawning in on the tracks while there was already a train coming in, and then the two trains clipped into each other. Random cars with 3 people floating around, some people alive, some people dead. A theater box that's apparently dimensionally transcendental because it's about 1,000,000 times bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. I appreciate the idea of them trying to give building interiors the illusion of depth, but this is just painful. And that's not even to mention the theater foyer that looks like an elevator caught between 2 floors. And that's just 2 examples of what would probably be dozens of examples if we looked hard enough. In fact, it got to the point where I started questioning everything that looked slightly off. I remember seeing these purple lights all over the ground and thinking it was some sort of catastrophic f***up of the lighting engine. Nope, turns out that was just the indicator for the snapshot collectible. Something I had actually forgotten was even in the game. But can you blame me at this point? Honestly, these were just the most memorable things. There were probably several, if not dozens of small individual instances that completely went over my head because it all faded into the white noise after a certain point. So it's honestly just best to assume that nothing is deliberate and everything is some sort of glitch or unintended side effect. And it still blows my mind that all of this is actually the quote-unquote fixed version of the game, which was once a catastrophically broken mess. And in fairness, none of these issues I encountered were game-breaking, they just show a lack of polish. These games are still functional if nothing else, so perhaps I did miss the boat on the truly venomous hate. And since I didn't have these games when they were new, I never got a feel for the games at their worst to really have an understanding of how far we've come. So I did something unprecedented. I bought the physical version on top of buying the digital versions on Steam. Because the magical thing about a physical version is that you don't need to update the files. You can simply turn off your Wi-Fi and play these games as they were intended at launch. Or roughly at launch, because the physical versions of course came out a couple of weeks after the digital versions, so the version on disc is the 1.02 version, and I think we're up to 1.112 at this point. So the truly god-awful version of these games are lost to time outside of those hour-long glitch compilations, but this is close enough to get a good comparison to see how far we've come. Quite far as it turns out. So just for shits and giggles, as well as to get a point of comparison, let's check them out. Let's play them for, let's say, an hour to see what comes up. In GTA 3, there were a lot of new weird instances of brokenness that I found. Specifically in the weird AI quirks, such as a car having its pathfinding bug out, making him drive diagonally. There were other instances of things taking place, such as random fights breaking out for no reason. On the topic of general glitches, there was this instance where I think a car spawned upside down or something because I was just driving over to a mission objective, and then there was a giant explosion that sorted things out. There was this one part where an NPC was clipping and jittering into nothing. There was this other part where there was a surface reflecting light but no light source. And the most major glitch I found in my short time playing through this version of the game is when I finished the mission Fuzzball. I respawned back into the game inside the wall of the police station and had no way to get out. I had to throw down a couple of grenades. There's also this one part where a character despawned in a cutscene before the cutscene ended. Like, Christ, I played this game for an hour just to test it out, and yet it seemed like every couple of minutes I was finding some new wild and wonderful way the game completely bugged out. And you know, this is probably only scraping the surface of what this version of the game offers, so I applaud them for being able to fix this version of the game, but the fact that it was ever this broken to begin with, let alone more broken, is kind of baffling when you think about it. Makes you wonder what the budget for this game was. $5 and a back alley handjob? On top of that, this game's graphics are even uglier, and this game is somehow even more unstable with a really jittery frame rate. Though in fairness, I'm playing this on PS4 instead of the PC, so that might be an optimization issue for that specific version, and not necessarily a fair comparison between the two versions. Regardless, GTA 3 in its relatively original state is a mess. As for Vice City, much like the more recent versions, it's probably the most stable out of all these games, but that doesn't mean it's not prone to some issues, such as spinning physics objects, bike tires clipping through the ground, yourself clipping through the ground, a charred corpse freezing in the exact pose they died in, a lamppost vanishing before my eyes, and probably half a dozen things I completely missed as well. In San Andreas, since it's the most broken even to this day, you won't be surprised to find out that it's the most broken in this version as well. Obviously, there's some hilarious relics, such as this issue wherein if you look backwards in first person, you'll get a face full of janky-ass CJ, but that's actually the case for Vice City as well. Probably would have been the case for GTA 3 if you were able to ride any motorcycles or bikes as well. And of course, there's also the physics. Yeah, as I was told, the physics objects just flip out as soon as they're detached from their fixed state. Sometimes they'll fall like they're supposed to, but sometimes they're weighted in such a way that they just stand upright and spin, or just jitter around like crazy. And even only sampling this game for an hour, it still felt like it was being held together by duct tape and string. Like how if you go to a safe house, certain objects will just spawn in and spawn out depending on where you're standing. Probably a relic of the original version of the game that this was plastered over. There's another moment where I did a pirouette while flying off a bike at one point. There was another moment where I was caught by the police and then the animation just cancelled out and I phased into my bike. And the sad thing is, despite still obviously being the most broken game in the trilogy in both its original and quote-unquote fixed state, San Andreas barely feels like it's any less broken now than it was back then. So it really feels like there's barely anything they could have done. I'm impressed, guys. You managed to make your own Master Chief Collection or Fallout 76. i.e., a game so broken it's borderline impossible to fix. Now, I haven't played the Master Chief Collection or F76 in any of their states. I'd imagine both those games are probably fixed now, but back during their initial releases, it was practically a story every other day about how the games were still catastrophically bugged out the butt. But really, these criticisms are meaningless. I'm only looking at these semi-original versions for the sake of Schadenfreude. It's fun, but ultimately meaningless because short of the internet ceasing to exist, these versions basically don't exist anymore. Ultimately, whatever they're deciding to call this version of the three games collectively, GTA the Remastered Trilogy, Grand Theft Auto the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, or whatever, my opinion of it is that it's tragically playable at this point, and when I say tragically playable, I mean it's generally fixed. There's no major crashes or game-breaking issues that I could find, unlike when the game was initially released, where I heard the game was crashing quite often. But there's so many other minor issues that this game has that can't be fixed without making a whole-ass new game, which is not going to happen. This is all we're getting. But at the very least, the issues that currently exist in the games aren't as intrusive. They're funny and they demonstrate a severe lack of polish, but it's not something that gets in the way. But I still hate how unpolished these games are, and I wouldn't mind so much if this weren't the only way to play these games now. I was always dubious of the fact that they pulled the original versions off digital storefronts when they were still available to buy up to a few weeks before the defective edition came out. I don't remember who, but there was a person at one point who tried to tell me that the best things these games do is give the games a release on modern consoles and platforms generally, except they were already released on modern platforms. I literally played a port of the PS2 games on PS4 back in 2020. Sure, they weren't perfect, but they were about as close to the original as you're gonna get at this point. And you could also buy these games on Steam, and with mods, you could easily get it running properly on modern systems. Speaking of mods, there are hundreds if not thousands of mods for each game that could enhance the experience or customize it to your particular preferences. I've seen videos where people will endeavor to install as many mods as possible to GTA San Andreas to see what will happen. But now, because those versions have been removed, no mods, no original graphics, 20 years of history flushed down the drain, and we're left with this, which means that we're actually worse off now than we were back then. We could have theoretically had both the original versions and the new versions, but for anybody to buy the new versions, they would first need to be a definitive upgrade compared to the original versions, and I don't think there's a soul alive who believes that to be the case. So they were forced to remove the original versions off storefronts in order to force people to buy the new one. Unless you're willing to pirate it or get your hands on an original copy, there's no way to play these games as they were originally intended. You're forced to play this ugly piece of absolute trash. And I will forever resent Rockstar Games for that. Because if they had to pull the original versions before releasing the new version, they could have easily included the original versions as a bonus purchase on top of the defective edition. And you know, if this version didn't forcefully replace the original versions, the worst I could say about these versions is that at least we still have the originals, but we don't, so I can't. But I guess I'm the sucker because I bought this shit. Basically, in a great many ways, Rockstar Games has fallen off for me. It began with their staunch refusal to move on from GTA 5 and start focusing on getting back to anything equating their output from the 2000s and early 2010s. Then it continued with GTA 5 being kinda bunk, and this was the final nail. 3 strikes, go f*** yourself. But hey, what does it matter? What does it matter if they hire an incompetent company to make a remaster of some of their most successful games and they completely butcher it? What does it matter if they're not making games because they can just keep re-releasing GTA 5 over and over and people will still buy it? What does it matter that they're allegedly going to be releasing GTA 6 for something like $20 to $40 higher than usual video game MSRP? People are still going to buy their games and they're still going to make money hand over fist. Nothing I say will ever matter. They will make money in spite of themselves. And as much as I wish their scumminess would come back to bite them, that will never happen. So what the f does it even matter? F the GTA Defective Edition, and f what Rockstar Games has become. Anyways, if you like this video and want to support the channel, leave a comment telling me what you think, subscribe, like this video, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. And if you want to support the channel in a more direct fashion, you can pledge to my Patreon for unique perks and rewards such as early access, Discord benefits, and exclusive content along with these fine folks right here. And an extra special thank you to Dick Kickham, Gaw004, Hydra Overlord, FarmCat84, Raph, Ranger X, Sphinx, Weird Webster, and Will Stokes for going above and beyond. I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.